In this section, we're going to start to focus on the news detail widget that is going to show information about one very particular story. We're going to first begin by focusing on displaying the title of the story at the very top of the screen. Once we get this title to appear, we'll then start to worry about showing the threaded comments underneath it. So to get the title to appear, all we have to do is wire up our comments block to our news detail widget. Remember that that block is exposing all of the different comments and the top level story through the stream of item with comments. So to get started, I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. I'm inside of my news detail file. The first thing we have to do inside of here is get access to our comments block. So I'm going to be making use of the comments provider that we had previously put together. At the top of this file, I will import, not a package. I want to go up one directory into the blocks folder, and then gets the comments provider.dart. Then inside my build method, I'll make use of the context argument along with the comments providers of method. So I'll say final block is comments provider.of context. So that gives us access to the block, which exposes the stream that is going to contain the cache map with all the data that we care about. Now to put together the logic to consume that stream, we could definitely add it inside this build method right here, but I think that we would be a little bit better off to maybe make a helper method that we'll call something like build body. And we'll make this helper method responsible for building all the body content that will appear inside of our scaffold. So I'm going to replace this text widget with a reference to a new helper method that we will call build body. Inside of build body, we're probably going to need access to our comments block, so I'm going to pass that in as the first and only argument. I'll then define the build body method inside of here. I'm going to mark this with a return type of widget, and I'm going to expect that it gets called with a comments block that we'll call block, like so. Okay, so now inside of here, we're going to put together some logic to watch the output of our stream from the comments block. Let's pull open the comments block file very quickly. Okay, so here's my comments block. We want to watch this stream right here, the stream that we had called item with comments. The item with comments stream is going to eventually emit maps with keys of integer and values of future item model. So we're going to first set up a stream builder that is going to watch the stream and attempt to rebuild itself anytime that we emit a new map with all of our different item models inside of it. So back inside of news detail, here's my build body method. The first thing I'm going to do is return a stream builder that's going to watch the stream of block.item with comments. So now anytime that we get a new value over the stream right here, we're going to rebuild the vast majority of content inside of our news detail widget. So here's my stream builder. We wired up the stream. We'll also set up our builder method, which is going to get arguments of context and of course our snapshot. Our snapshot right here is going to contain that map with IDs and all the item models. I'm going to make sure that I annotate the type of the snapshot right here because I want to give Dart a little bit of information about the type of data that I'm going to expect to receive inside this builder method. And so this is another instance where we've got a rather complex type. It's going to be async snapshot that is going to contain a map with keys of int and values of future item model, like so. Now you'll notice we have a little bit of errors right here on future and item model, simply because we have not imported their respective types into this file. So I first want you to make sure that you've got the correct number of less than signs and greater than signs inside of here. And then once you've checked that out, let's flip up to the top of this file and we'll add on some imports for the Dart async and the item model files. So we'll go up to the top. At the very, very top, I'll add on import Dart async for the future type. And then I'll also add in an import statement for models item model.dart. So now if I go back down, those two errors have gone away. I've saved the file, and you'll notice that my code right here, the function that we just defined, has kind of reformatted itself to accommodate for these very long argument lists that we have. All right, let's take a quick break right here. We'll come back to the next section, and we're going to start putting together some implementation of our builder method. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. In the last section, we set up a stream builder to consume our item with comments stream inside of our comments block. We've got our builder method put together, and so now inside of our builder method, here's the opening closing curly brace for that method. I'm going to start to define the logic that we need to get our very particular item, like the top level item, the top level story, and pull off the title for that one and show it on the screen. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I get a comma after the closing curly brace of that builder method. I'll save it again just to get a little bit of better formatting inside of here. Then inside this builder method, we're going to add on first some logic to indicate to our user that we are trying to attempt to load some information about the particular story that they just clicked on. So as usual, we need to watch the snapshot and make sure that it has some amount of data before we attempt to show any information about it on the screen. So I'm going to say if snapshot does not have any data, again, notice that we've got the exclamation on here. And if that's the case, for right now, we'll just return a text widget that says loading, like so. We'll eventually come back to this and put together a little bit better loading mechanism, but for right now, just showing the text loading is going to be good enough. So then inside of here, we're going to look into the snapshot. We're going to look at the data that we get, which remember is going to be our map of all the different items. And we're going to first focus solely on getting out the very particular item ID from that map. And quick reminder, item ID right here is the ID of the very top level story that we want this entire screen to be focused on. So back down inside my builder method, I'm going to make a new temporary variable that I'll call item future. I'm going to call it item future because that's technically what it is. It is a future that is going to resolve with an item. It is not just an item. So I'm going to specifically mark it as item future. And this is going to be our snapshot.data. And we're going to try to pull out the value at, excuse me, not item data, but item ID, like so. So this is going to be the future that represents the very top level story that we're trying to show on the screen. So once we get this future, we'll then set up our future builder to watch this thing. And then once the item future resolves with the item that we care about, we'll show its title on the screen. So from my builder method for the stream builder, I'm going to return a future builder. The future for this is going to be our item future. And when this thing eventually resolves, we'll call our builder method inside the future builder. So we've again got this kind of nesting logic going on. And then we've got our second snapshot right here. Now we've already got a variable called snapshot kind of in the scope of all this stuff. So I'm going to annotate or call this argument right here, rather than just being snapshot, I'm going to call it item snapshot, just to kind of indicate, hey, this is a snapshot that indicates an item or contains an item. And I'm also going to annotate its type, which is going to be an async snapshot that is going to eventually resolve with an item model. I'll make sure I get my curly braces. There we go. So now inside of here, we do have to go through that same kind of headache of checking to see if our snapshot has any data. Remember, we get these kind of nested up data checks. The first one right here is to catch the case in which we have not yet emitted anything out of our stream, not even that empty map that is supposed to eventually have some data about our top level story. We've also got the second check that we're going to put inside of here to make sure that we've actually fetched the very given item, or the item that we're trying to show very prominently on the screen. So I'll say if item snapshot does not have any data, and again, notice that we've got the exclamation on here, then we will again just return the text loading, like so. So if we finally get to this line of code right here, if we finally get this far, that means that we have finally, after all this time, gotten our snapshot with the map of item models. Off there, we've pulled out the item that represents the actual item that we want to show on the screen, and this thing has finally resolved with our item model. So right here is where we can finally consume the data within that thing. For right now, let's just again return a little bit of text. We'll take the item that we care about. So that's going to be the item snapshot. So we'll do item snapshot dot data. That's going to be the item model that we care about. And then we can see that we get all the properties on this thing that represent an item model. And so for you and me, we want to show the title of this top level story. So I'm going to reference the title property. And I'll close it off with a semicolon like so. All right, let's save this and we'll do a quick test. So I'll save that. I'll flip back over to my terminal. I'll do my reload. Wait for that to kick in. We get our top news, and I'll look at the layoffs at, wow, that's not a very positive story. Let's do OpenAI 5 instead. So I'll tap on that right there, and I see the title of the story appear on the screen instantly. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got the title on here. We'll take a quick break. We're going to come back and continue the next section. We're going to work on a little bit of formatting on the title just to make sure that it kind of shows up nicely. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. In the last section, we got the title of our story to appear on the body of the news detail widget. So now that we've got the title right here, well, you know, the title's showing up, but it sure does not look good. It's tiny little text, and it's crammed in up here to the very top. So rather than using this kind of very boring implementation right here, I think that we should maybe add a little bit of styling to this text widget. Now we've already got a lot of logic inside this build body method. So rather than further expanding the method with some more options for this text widget right here, I'm going to again make another helper method. So rather than returning the text right there, I'm going to return a helper method called build title. And I'm going to pass in the item model that we just got from our item snapshot. So I'll pass in item snapshot.data. So now as a helper method inside this class still, I'll build title, which will be called within item model instance that we'll call simply item. And then from here, we will return some collection of widgets to represent the title on the screen with a little bit of nice styling on it. So the first thing we need to do here is to make sure that we've got some title appearing. Well, we already know how to do that. We can just return a text widget with the item title inside of it. But what I'm much more concerned about is thinking about the actual styling of this thing. So at a very bare minimum, I think that we probably do not want this text right here to be absolutely sandwiched up against the app bar. I think that it should probably have a little bit of spacing above and below it, just so that we can kind of more easily separate it against the app bar and the list of comments that we're going to eventually render underneath it. So I think that from build title, we should probably return a container that will have a little bit of margin above and below it. So to the container, I'll add on our margin property, which will be edge insets. Now, as we just said, we probably only want to have margin applied to the top and bottom, but you know, we might want a little bit of margin on the left and right hand sides as well, so that if it's a really long title, it doesn't like push up directly against the left or the right hand edges. So I'm going to do an edge insets all, and I'll say that around all sides. Remember, if we use the all constructor method right here, we pass in the margin that we want to have on all sides of the container. I think that we could probably get away with like 10 pixels. So now our title is going to have 10 pixels on all sides. Then after defining the margin, we'll set up our child, which will be a text widget. The text that it's going to show is going to be the item's title. So I'll say item.title. And then we're going to add on a couple of additional properties to this thing just to get it to show up on the screen a little bit more nicely. So first off, I probably want to center this text on the screen rather than have it always floating over to the left-hand side. So to center some text on the screen, I can pass in a name property of text align. Text align takes values of type text align. So this is another one of those properties where there's a couple of predefined ways that we can do our text alignment on the screen. And so you'll see that I get some different recommendations here already popping up. I can do text align.center to obviously center the text on the screen. We can do end, justify, left, right, and start. So in our case, we want to center on the screen, so I'll do text align.center like so. That's going to center the text, but when you look at the text again, well, even if it's centered, even if it has a little bit of margin, the text itself is still very small. And so the last thing I want to do here is apply a little bit of styling to enlarge the size of the title and maybe also make it display as bold text as well. So for that, I'm going to define a name property of style on text. This is going to take an instance of text style. So I'll pass in text style like so. And to this text style object, we can pass in a wide variety of different properties. As usual, you can check out the documentation for the constructor of text style to figure out all the different properties you can customize. At this point in the course, we've looked at so many constructor methods that I'm not going to make you flip over if you don't want to. So I'll just tell you the two properties that we care about here. The first one is going to be font size, which we can use to change the size of the font. We'll use 20 pixels. And then we can also customize the font weight. For the font weight, we can either specify a font weight object, or we can attempt to directly pass in a double to represent the font size. For us, there is a preset value that represents bold, which is font weight.bold, like so. So two things to notice in here. Well, really one thing that occurred twice. We have seen this pattern right here so many times throughout this course, where we'll want to pass in some very specific property. We don't have to like make up a double or a string or something like that to represent the property. Instead, there are sets of enums that have predefined properties for us. And those enums have the most common values that you're probably going to want to use anyways. So hey, if you want to center, there's an enum available for that. If you want to bold the text, there's an enum available for that as well. Okay, let's do another test here. So here's build title. We're calling build title up here. We're passing in the item model. I think we're pretty much good to go. So I'll save this file. We'll do our refresh. I'll pull open my emulator again. And I'll tap on OpenAI 5 again. And awesome. So we've got OpenAI 5 appearing on the screen, but you will notice that it appears that this thing has not been centered quite as we would have expected. So let's take a quick pause. We'll come back to the next section and we'll figure out why this thing did not actually center itself. In the last section, we added on some logic that we thought would end up with our text widget being centered on the middle of our screen. So here's the text. We passed in a text align and we gave it textalign.center. However, when we actually tested this out, we saw that the text still appeared on the left-hand side. So in this section, we're going to have another little discussion about alignment with Flutter because it is a little bit of a tricky topic. So let me first begin by showing you what happened when we put together our container that had a child with text that had text align center. So all that did, we can kind of imagine, here's the widget right here. So when we put on that text align center, it did properly try to center the text on the screen. However, remember what a container does in general. In general, a container is going to attempt to size itself only to accommodate the children within it. So our container right here, although the text inside of it was centered, the container shrunk until it just perfectly had enough width to accommodate the single little child it had inside there. And so essentially, we ended up with something like this. The container is just wide enough to show the text inside of it. The text inside there is centered, but in the context of this very small box, being centered doesn't really mean a lot. So in order to correctly get our text to show up, we need to not only center the text, we also need to make sure that our container attempts to expand as far from the left-hand side to the right-hand side as possible. So to do so, we're going to take a quick glance at the container documentation again. I've got my container docs right here. Remember docs.flutter.io, and you can search for the container class. So inside the initial documentation right here, you can find a section labeled layout behavior. And it gives some information about how the container attempts to lay itself out on the screen. So you can see right here on the too long didn't read, the container tries in order to honor alignment, to size itself to the child, and some other stuff. For you and me, right now, the size or the layout of the container is obeying this second option right here, which is to size itself to the child. Like we just said, when the container attempts to lay itself out, it's going to try just to accommodate the child within it, which is why we are seeing this behavior right here. So if we want to override that behavior, we can pass in an alignment property. And this alignment property will allow us to get the container to stretch all the way from the left to the right of the screen. So let's take a look at the documentation for alignment. Inside of the container class right here, I'll go down to my constructor as usual. Okay, so here's my constructor. Inside of constructor, you'll see that we can pass in a name property of alignment, which takes a type of alignment geometry. Now this is going to be another one of those cases where there's a enum that we're going to attempt to access properties on. So I'm going to click on the alignment geometry type. So here's the alignment geometry class. And so inside of here, you might think, okay, this thing is going to list out all the different ways in which we can lay out a object or possibly provide an alignment here. In reality, the alignment class is a base class. It's another one of those kind of not quite, this one in particular is not an abstract class, but it's a base class that just provides a base upon which the real alignments that we use inside of our application are going to extend. So the actual class we're going to pass in this thing, again, this is a kind of a layer of indirection here, is the alignment class. So here's an alignment class right here. And then inside of alignment class, we can scroll down towards the bottom. We'll see that down here, there's the constants, and inside of constants are all the different positions that we can use to lay out a particular container. And so for you and me, we're going to find top center. So when we use top center, the container is going to try to center itself on the screen as far towards the top as it possibly can. So long story short, back inside of our code editor, I'm going to find my container. I'm going to add on an alignment property, which will be alignment.topCenter, like so. So now we'll save this. You might be curious, do we still need text align right here? The answer is yes, we still need text align. If we don't pass in text align of center, then what we're going to end up with is something that looks like that. So the container will attempt to put itself at the very top of the screen and stretch all the way from left to right. However, inside that container, the text still has a normal left-hand alignment. And so if we want the text inside there to be centered, we have to make sure that we specifically tell the text to be centered as well. So we are going to leave on the textAlign.center property. Okay, let's test this out again. I'll do a refresh. We'll wait for the refresh to kick in, as usual. Okay, there we go. And I'll look at OpenAI 5 again, and now it appears to be centered on the screen at the very top. And I'll try this out with a longer title. Here's one right here. Awesome. So it looks like this text is now properly centered at the very top of the screen. It's at a larger font size, and it's also bolded. So, quick break, continue in the next section, and we'll start to talk about rendering our list of comments on the screen as well. In the last section, we got our title to successfully appear on the screen. We're now going to focus our attention on rendering out the list of comments underneath that. Now, the important thing to notice about this comment list right here is that inside of a comments child, we want this thing to be kind of indented a little bit over to the right-hand side to indicate that this particular comment right here is a response to this one right above it. So putting together this comment list is going to be a little bit different than some of the lists that we've built previously. Let's take a look at a couple of diagrams to understand why that is. Okay, so first off, here's the diagram of what we had done previously for the top level news stories that we had shown on our news list widget. So this is not what we're working on right now. This is what we had done previously. So before, we had a list of integers where every single integer represented the ID of a top story. We were then able to take this list of integers and we passed it off to an item view builder. That item view builder iterated more or less, it didn't kind of directly iterate, but it more or less iterated over this list of integers. And for every one of these IDs, we took the ID, we used that ID to look at our cache map. And from that cache map, we got some very particular item model that we wanted to then show on the screen. And so previously, we had this nice ordered list of integers that told us the exact order of stories to show on the screen. And because we had this nice ordered list of integers, we were able to very easily make use of the list view builder widget. So this time, we don't have quite a nice data structure to make use of. So we do not have anything that has like a list of item models that we can use for rendering out our list of comments. We don't have this data structure. We don't have this nice list that will allow us to very easily make use of that item view builder. Instead, we have a much more complicated data structure. So this time around, all we really have is our cache map, just the cache map by itself. Inside this cache map, we've got all the IDs of every different item model. And so we need to somehow take this cache map and use it to construct this somewhat ordered list of comments. So how are we going to do that? Okay, well, let's remember that the comments that we have form a sort of tree data structure. At the very top is the original story, so ID 10 would represent like this title right here. That original top level story then has that list of kids underneath it that represent the IDs of the top level comments on the story. And then on each of those children, each of those comments is another list of kids. So these would be like second level comments that are all responses to 288 right here. So because we have this kind of nasty data structure, we do not have a nice ordered list of elements that we can very easily iterate over. So we're going to have to think of a little bit more clever solution. So here's my idea. Here's what I'm going to suggest we do. I think that we should create a new widget inside of our application called a comment widget. A comment widget is going to be used recursively. So inside of a comments build method, we're going to try to construct other comment widgets. Our top level story up here of 10 is going to have some number of kids. So we're going to take each of the IDs in that kids list, like 288, 959, and 2995, and we'll pass each of those IDs to this comment widget. When we pass the ID to the comment widget is going to attempt to find the item model corresponding to that ID. It'll then show the comments text on the screen, and then it will recursively look at all of that item model's children, all the kids, and it's going to create a new comment widget for each one, which will then be responsible for, say, finding the item model corresponding to 925 right here and show that comment on the screen. And so by using this kind of recursive widget, we're going to be able to very easily create this kind of nested list of widgets right here. So that's the plan. That's the overall idea. Now, one kind of curveball in here, one little bit of a challenge. So as I went through pains to make sure it was really clear, we do not have this nice ordered list of records to show on the screen anymore. We've just got that map, and we have some type of kind of implicit tree structure that goes along with them. Remember, the tree data structure doesn't really exist anywhere. We just have the top level item model, and we can look at its kids property and use those kids to find these other things. So we don't really have a tree data structure per se. We don't have like an object in memory that represents a tree. That's what I mean to say. So we don't have the tree, we don't have the list of IDs right here, we don't have anything like that. So when we try to actually build the list, we still do want to make sure that it is a scrollable list. I want to make sure that we can kind of scroll through this list right here. Now with Flutter, by just showing a bunch of items kind of stacked up on each other, they are not automatically made to be scrollable. So in other words, if we try to just show like a ton of comment widgets, like 50 going down right here, it's not going to be automatically made scrollable by Flutter. We have to specifically reach out to Flutter and say, hey, find this set of widgets right here and try to make them scrollable. Now previously, all this kind of scrolling behavior was taken care of us by the list view builder. This time around, we're going to use a slightly different widget to still render a list of widgets right here with this kind of modified approach of this recursive comment widget. And then this slightly different widget is going to make sure that this list is scrollable as well. So let's take a look at the documentation that's going to make this stuff scrollable. So it is still a list view class. Maybe not a big surprise there. We're still going to use the list view class to make all those different comments scrollable. So I'm going to scroll on down to my constructor methods inside of here. Okay, so here's my constructors. So again, previously we used the builder method. The builder method is very useful anytime that we know the entire size of the list that we want to render, or anytime that we know like, okay, here's like a list of records, we want to iterate over this and produce a widget for each one. But if we just have a list of widgets that we want to make scrollable, we're going to instead use the default constructor of list view. So with this default list view constructor, we create a scrollable linear array of widgets, and that scrollable list of widgets is going to be coming from an explicit list that gets passed in as children. Now, something clear about here, it says we're going to create a list of widgets from an explicit list. When it says right here explicit list, it's not talking about like a list of records or a list of models. that are going to be used to create the list. When it says an explicit list, it's saying if you pass in a list of children, the list view will use that to render them out on the screen. So when it says explicit list, it's not talking about the models or anything like that. It's saying if you pass me a list of widgets, I will show them on the screen and I will make sure that they are scrollable. That's it. Okay, so enough of this, enough talking about like how we're going to approach it. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back to the next section and we're going to start to implement all this stuff inside of our news detail widget. So quick break and I'll see you in just a minute. In the last section, we had a long discussion about some of the big challenges that are going to arise when we start to render this list of comments. So first things first, we need to make sure that we somehow use this recursive widget that we're going to put together called comment to show all the different comments on the screen. Then in addition to that, once we want to show the title and all the comments underneath it on the screen, we're going to be making use of the list view default constructor right here. And we're using this list view to make sure that the title and all the comments underneath it are scrollable, because by default, Flutter will not make things scrollable for you. So with all that in mind, let's flip back over to our code editor and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm back inside my editor and I'm still looking at the news detail widget. Now we need to first begin by thinking about where we want to try to put together the list of all these different comments. Maybe a better way of putting that question, or that thing we need to do, is to say rather than deciding where, it might be better to say when. So right now, inside of the build body method, we have a stream builder and a future builder. We cannot attempt to render our list of comments until we have successfully loaded up the top level story, because only that top level story is aware of all the top level comments inside of its kids list. So comment right here might represent 288 and 959. We don't know that we need to render 288 and 959 until the original story has completely loaded up. So in other words, back inside of build body right here, only after we've gotten some data from the stream builder and only after our top level story has actually been resolved will we have the information that we need to render out the list of comments on the screen. So in short, inside of the future builder, where we finally have access to our top level story, which is, essentially, don't write this code in, I'm just going to do this very temporarily. I'm going to say top level story is item snapshot.data. Only when we've gotten to this point right here do we have the information that we need to show that list of comments. So clearly we need to put this initial kind of list rendering logic somewhere inside of the future builder's build method. Okay, so inside of here, again, we've got a lot of nested logic inside of here, and we already tried to extract some of that nested logic by creating a helper method called build title. So rather than trying to put all of our list building logic for all the comments directly inside of here, again, I think we should make a helper method that's going to first call build title and then attempt to get the list of comments going as well. And that's just going to help us from kind of stacking up all of our logic too deeply inside this file. So rather than returning build title right here, I'm going to instead return a method to a call, or return the result of a method call to a new method that we'll call build list. And so I'm going to add that as a helper method inside of our class. So build list purpose right here is to render not only the title, but all the comments underneath it as well. So because the build list has to render the title and all the comments underneath it, we should probably pass it the actual item model and the entire item map, because that will be the information that this method needs to show the top level title and all the comments underneath it. So to build list, I'm going to pass in our item snapshot .data. So again, that's the actual item model. And then I'm also going to pass in the entire item cache map as well from snapshot up here. So I'm going to also pass in snapshot.data. So now build list has all the information that it needs to render the top level story and the list of comments underneath it. It's got the item model and it's got the cache map. So I'll go back to build list. I'm going to make sure that I annotate those arguments inside of here. So I'll say this is going to be an item model that we'll call item. And the second argument is going to be our map with IDs and future item model. And we'll call that thing item map. like so. Excuse me, this is not ID right here, that's an integer, like so. Okay, so that's a good start. Let's take a quick pause right here. We'll come back to the next section and we're going to start to implement the build list helper method. In the last section, we started putting together our build list helper method. Again, this thing is going to be responsible for showing the title and all the comments underneath it. We definitely know that we want this title and all the comments underneath it to be a scrollable list. So from the list view, I'm going to return, or from the build list method right here, I'm going to return an instance of list view. And again, list view is what's going to make all this stuff on here scrollable. The list view constructor is going to take a list of children. So I'll mark this thing as a list of widgets, like so. And then inside of here, we're going to attempt to show first the title and then all of our comments right underneath it. So we know that build title is going to have to be called from inside there because build title is what constructs the title on the screen. So the first thing that we're going to show inside the list view is build title. And into build title, we have to pass our item model. So I'm going to make sure I pass in the item like so. Okay, so let's test this out right here and just make sure that we got this far with everything working. So I'll flip back over, I'll do my refresh. And we'll let this kick in. And then I'll click on whatever story. And I still see everything rendering on here as I would expect. Now you'll notice that I can kind of pull up and down on this thing, and I see those little scroll indicators to indicate that I'm at the end and really the start of the list. So we definitely now have the list appropriately showing up, and inside that list we are seeing our title. So now we need to think about how we're going to get our list of comments in here as well. Now first thing I want to remind you is that as we had just discussed, we are going to create a new widget that we are going to call comment. And this comment widget right here is going to be responsible for rendering a very given comment on the screen and then recursively rendering all of its children underneath it as well. So let's take a quick pause from build list, and we're going to do a little bit of a pivot and go start putting together that comment widget instead. Once we've got some initial implementation of the comment widget put together, we'll come back over to build list and we'll use build list to show all those different comments on the screen. All right, so inside my widgets directory, I'm going to make a new file that is going to house a widget responsible for showing one comment plus all of its children on the screen. So inside the widgets directory, I'm going to make a new file called simply comment.dart, like so. Then inside of here, we'll put together some boilerplate for creating a stateless widget. I'm going to also add in a couple of different import statements that I'm just about positive we're going to need over time. So at the top, I'm going to add an import for Dart async. I'll do an import for package flutter material.dart. I'll do an import for our item model, which is at models item model.dart. And I think that's probably good for now. Then inside of here, I'll declare my class comment, which is of course going to be a stateless widget. On the comment class, I'm going to expect that we're going to pass in a couple of different instance variables. So the first instance variable that I expect to be passed to this comment thing right here is probably going to be the ID of the comment that we want to show on the screen. So I'm going to assume that this thing is going to have an instance variable that's an integer that we'll call item ID. And again, this is going to represent the comment that we want the comment widget to show. And then I'm going to assume that we're also going to pass in the entire map data structure right here. So every single one of these comment widgets will know what comment it's supposed to show. It will be able to retrieve that comment from the comment map, and then it will also be able to create its list of kids, all the kid comment widgets, pass them their respective IDs, and they will also get an instance of the comment map as well. And so every single one of these different comment widgets is going to have the ability to show itself and all of its children, and it's not going to have to go back up to the block and reference that thing to pull any information out of it. Okay, so in addition to getting the reference to the item ID that this thing needs to show, it's also going to get the cache map, which will be of type map, integer future item model. And we'll call this thing item map as well. We'll then set up our constructor. So this is going to be called with item ID. and item map. All right, well, let's take a quick break. In the next section, we'll come back and we're going to start putting together our build method for the comment widget. In the last section, we started putting together our comment widget. We're now going to start to move forward by defining this thing's build method. So inside of the comment class, we'll say that this thing's going to have a build method that will be called with some context, and it's going to, of course, be returning a widget. All right, so inside of here, we need to somehow make use of the item map and the item ID to show some information about a very particular comment, and then iterate over that comment's children and build a new comment widget for each of those. Now, the first thing to understand here is that between the item ID and the items map that we have all the information that we need to get access to the item model that this widget is supposed to show on the screen. But the one little catch, don't forget, we're always going to be working with futures that are going to resolve with item models. So from our build method, when we try to access our very particular item model inside the item map, we're not going to get directly an item model. Instead, we're going to get a future that is going to eventually resolve with our item model. So from our build method, we're going to declare the fact that we want to assume that the thing that we're trying to wait on here is going to be the future. So we're going to first place a future builder. And the future that we're going to specify here is going to be inside of our item map. We want to look for the item ID that this comment widget is supposed to show. So item ID like so. We'll then add on our typical builder method, which is going to have some context and our async snapshot that we'll simply call snapshot. And as usual, we'll annotate the type of this. So the snapshot that we're going to get from our future right here is going to be an async snapshot that's going to eventually resolve with an item model. So inside of our builder method, we'll say if snapshot doesn't have any data. So as usual, make sure you get that exclamation on there. Then we will return a little text thing that says still loading comment, like so. And then after that, if we get past that if statement, that means that we have successfully fetched this item model that is supposed to represent the given comment. So if we get past that point, for right now, let's just try to render out just that comment by itself and not worry about iterating over its children. So I'm going to return a text widget that looks at snapshot.data and tries to get the comment text. So snapshot.data right here is our item model. If we want to get just the comment text by itself, we can reference the text property like so. Okay, so I think that's just about enough to at least test this thing out. Now, of course, we can't test it just yet. We've put together the comment widget right here, but we have not yet wired it up to our news detail widget. So let's take another quick pause. When we come back to the next section, we're going to import the comment widget into our news detail and then make sure that thing actually gets displayed on the screen. In the last section, we got some initial implementation of the comment widget put together. So the comment widget right now, it has a future builder. It's going to look at a comment, wait for it to resolve, and then show the text of that comment on the screen. So with our current implementation, we're only going to be able to show the top level story and its first initial level of comments. We've got no code in here yet to recursively build out all the comments that are supposed to eventually appear on the screen. So we should only be seeing top level comments. Okay, so we've got our comment widget put together. I'm going to flip back to the news detail. So here's news detail right here. We're going to import the comment widget and then make sure that we show one individual comment widget for every comment that the top level story has. So at the top, I'm going to first go into our widgets directory and get the comment.dart file. I'll then scroll on down to our build list method right here. So again, we've got our list view. At present, it's showing just the title, but we now want to look at this item model. So this item model right here, that's our top level story. We want to look at all of its children. And for every one of its children, we want to construct a new comment widget. So to do so, I'm going to put in a little bit of logic up here. I'm going to first say final comments list. So this is going to be a list of comment widgets. We're going to look at our item model. We're going to look at the kids list, and we're going to map over that thing. So I'll pass my map function in. The map function is going to be called with the ID of every kid to the top level story. So I'll receive that ID of that child comment in this inner function right here in the mapping function as a argument that we'll simply call, how about like kid ID? I think that makes sense. We could also call it like, comment ID, because that's technically what it is, but we'll just call it kid ID. So then inside of here, we're going to create a new instance of our column widget. So we're going to return a comment widget, and to this thing, we need to pass in both our item ID that this comment widget is supposed to show, and we also need to pass in the entire item map. So for our item ID, we'll pass in kid ID, which is the comment that we're currently looking at. And then for the item map, we will pass in our item map, which was given to the build list method as an argument called item map, like so. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to save this. One thing that I want to point out here, it's a little bit of a gotcha. Anytime we use a mapping function, it does not actually return a list, like a list that we can actually use inside of our list of widgets right here. Instead, anytime we use a mapping function, it returns something called an iterable, which you see right here as being the return type. So an iterable is not the same thing as a list. So unfortunately, we can't just take this comments list right here and add it into this list of children. We have to first do a little bit of coercion of its type. So on the return from the map function, I'm going to call .toList, which is going to take that iterable and convert it to an actual list of the type that you and I would expect. So now that we've got the comments list, we need to take this list of widgets right here and essentially kind of merge it in with this list right here. Now, if you're coming from the world of JavaScript and you're familiar with ES 2015, or if you come from, I think, Python, maybe Ruby, I forget off the top of my head, if you come from these other languages, you might be used to something called the spread operator. So one thing that would be really nice to do would be to write out ... comments list like so. So if we were working with JavaScript, this would take all of the records inside of comments list and try to add them into this wrapping list right here, which is what you and I want. Unfortunately, we do not have a spread operator in the world of Dart. So taking our comments list right here and adding it into this list right here is unfortunately a little bit complicated. So here's what we're going to do. Rather than defining our list of widgets right there, I'm going to delete all that. We're going to first put together an initial argument up here. We'll say final children is going to be an empty list of widgets. To children, I'm going to add the build title, and I'll pass in the item for that. So now inside the children list right here, we've got just the title by itself. So we're now going to kind of merge together this children list along with comments list right here as well. So down on the children name property, we will, or excuse me, right here, right after we create the comments list, we will say children.addAll comments list like so. So in short, we are creating our list of children. We add one element to it. We create a second list right here, and then we merge the two lists together with add all. As you might guess, add all takes some other list. It takes everything inside there and adds it to our children. So now we can pass in simply children to the list view like so. Okay, this logic right here, honestly, it looks a little bit nastier than it is. Essentially, the problem is that we just want to create these two separate lists and kind of join them together. That's it. Okay, so now that we've got that put together, let's do a quick test inside of our emulator. So I'll do my refresh. And again, with the current implementation, we expect just to see the initial top level list of comments. So if I click on the first, whichever story here, it doesn't really matter. I see my list of comments. And if I start to scroll down, you'll notice that there are like no spacing, no indentation. Again, this is just the top level comments. So it looks like we've definitely are correctly showing a list of comments on the screen, which is good progress. Let's continue in the next section where we're going to start to work on the ability to get our recursive comments to show up as well. And we'll also start to think about how we're going to start to kind of like style and indent each of these separate threads. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. We've now got our list of top level comments being rendered on the screen right here through our comment widget. But again, these are just the top level comments. We're not seeing any actual children inside of here. So in this section, we're going to start to work on our build method right here. And rather than just returning a text widget that shows the comments text right here, we're going to instead look at the item, or look at the comment, which belongs to snapshot.data right here. That's our item model. We're going to look at all the kids that belong to that comment, and we're going to render out an additional comment widget for every single one of those kids. So let's get to it. The first thing we need to understand is that from the comment widget, we want to, without a doubt, return a list of different widgets. We definitely want to show a list here. At present, we just have the ability to show one individual text element. So rather than just returning text right here, I'm going to instead return a column instead. And remember, a column allows us to lay out a sequence of vertical widgets. So the column is going to have some children. And inside of here, we'll add in a text widget specifically to show the current snapshot.data text, like so. Okay, so we've now got the ability to return multiple widgets, and inside children, we are still returning the current comments text. So now we want to, inside of here, iterate through all this thing's children and show up a different instance of comment for each of those children. So we're essentially in this same exact scenario that we were in just a second ago, back inside of news detail, where we put together our build list method right here. We want to show some collection of children, and we're going to start off with some like initial title that we want to show, and then we're going to want to append a mapped list to that thing. So almost the same exact scenario now over inside of the comment widget instead. So as we know, we cannot very easily put together this entire list on the fly. We're going to have to kind of do a little bit of pre-calculation up here. So I'm going to make a list of children that we'll call children. And inside of here, to start, we're going to show simply by itself a text with snapshot.data.text. We'll then iterate over our item model, and for every one of that kid IDs that it has, we'll add in some additional records to children. Now we can take a slightly different approach than what we did just a moment ago back inside of news detail over here with this kind of nasty looking stuff. Rather than doing a mapping function right here, which kind of looks a little bit nasty, one additional way to do this would be to iterate over our list of children or the list of kids. We could use a for each loop or a for each helper. And then for each of those kids, we'll add in a new record to the children list. So let's see what that would look like. So we could instead do snapshot.data.kids, and then we can do a for each. So for each will be called with the ID of every one of these kids, which we'll again call kid ID. So now inside of here, we're going to construct a new instance of a comment widget. Our comment widget is still going to take a item ID, which will be the kid ID, and then it also needs to get a reference to the overall map. So we'll pass in item map, which is going to come from this thing's instance variable of item map. So we're just taking this item map and we're passing it down time and time again to every one of these additional comments that get created. So I'll pass in the item map like so. So this right here just creates the comment. So we can now take that comment and add it to the children list. So to do so, in front of the comment, I'll say children.add, and we'll add the comment like so. Now, if you want to, you could put a comma after the comment constructor just to add a little bit of more legibility to this thing. Okay, and the last thing we need to do, we'll take this list of children that we just constructed and we'll pass it into the column constructor. All right, so I'll save. There's the reformat. And I think we're ready to test this out. So I'll do my refresh back over here. Now, of course, it's going to be a little bit challenging to actually tell whether or not our entire list of comments are showing up because we don't really have any divider between comments just yet, but we'll give it our best shot. I'm going to find a story with a little bit fewer comments on it. So how about old internet files right here? It only has 3 comments. So I'll look at that one. And then very interestingly, you'll notice how we saw still loading comment appear 3 times. And then it appears, I don't know, it's kind of hard to see whether or not there are truly 3 here or not, but I'm just going to assume that, yeah, we're probably seeing 3 here. Let's try a different one and maybe we can get a better view. Let's find one. Here's 4 comments. Let's try that one. All right, that was pretty neat. You might have noticed that we saw the initial still loading comment appear. Once we then fetched that comment then tried to show a comment widget as a child underneath it. And so for that follow-up comment load, we saw a still loading comment. And so you can kind of see that recursive loading in action. So I feel like pretty reasonable to say that we're probably successfully recursively rendering out all these comments. So let's take a quick break right here. In the next section, we're going to figure out how we can add a little bit more styling onto the comment list. In the last section, we added in the ability to kind of recursively load each of these different comments. However, definitely some bad styling on here right now. So in this section, we're going to enhance the styling of each individual comment a little bit. At present, the actual comment appears from this text right here that is the first entry into the children widgets list. So rather than just showing some text right there, I think that maybe we could reuse that same list tile that we'd used previously back way long ago inside of our news list tile. So here's the news list tile widget right here. You'll recall that inside of here at some point in time, we put together a built-in widget called list tile, which is kind of a nice looking rectangle that has both a title and subtitle property. I think that we could provide a title of the comment text, and then maybe the subtitle could be the comment's author. And so that's going to leave us with something that looks very nice, like what was originally reflected on our mockups back over here. So to do so, I'm going to flip back over to my comment widget. So here's the build method. Here's a list of children. And so rather than showing the text on there directly, I'm going to take that out, and we will instead show a list view, or excuse me, a list tile that's going to have a title property and a subtitle property as well. So the title is going to continue to be the text of the comment, which is snapshot.data.text. And then the subtitle is going to be the author, which will be snapshot.data, and then the author is reflected in the by property. So by, like so. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, one thing you'll notice inside of here, we are referencing snapshot.data like several times inside this function. So maybe rather than referencing snapshot.data over and over, we should probably define a temporary variable up here of simply item. And this will be snapshot.data. Snapshot.data, there we go. And now we can go through this function and replace each of those with simply item. And then the third one down here as well. And we're just doing that for simple legibility, just to make this thing a little bit easier to read. Now you'll notice that we are getting a little bit of an error here. I made a little bit of mistake. We do not assign the string directly to the title and subtitle property. As usual, those have to be text widgets. Let's fix that up really quick. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now what would be really neat is if after showing each of these list tiles, if we also showed a little divider as well. You'll recall that a divider is just a horizontal line meant to indicate kind of a separation between 2 subsequent list tiles. So underneath the list tile, I'll add in a divider to that thing as well, like so. Okay, so we're now putting the list tile together. We put the divider in, we then iterate over the item's kids, and for each one of those kids, we add in a new comment widget. And so again, we get this kind of recursive widget structure every time we tried to show an individual story. So as usual, let's do another test. I'll do my refresh. We'll wait for it to kick in. And I'll click on a story. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now you'll notice we get some errors over here, which is okay. We're going to address those in just a second. But on the story itself, you'll notice how we've got the kind of top level comment text. and then I can see the author listed underneath it, and there's that kind of very faint divider, and that's separating all of the different comments that we're showing. So this right here is showing the entire full list of comments. However, it's not really clear what structure there is to the comments. We're not really showing any indentation to indicate any type of threading or nesting of comments. So there's definitely still a little bit of work to be done in that regard. In addition, we definitely need to figure out why we're seeing this error message over here. This is definitely an expected error message, so if you're seeing it, don't sweat it. We'll fix that up in just a second. So let's take a quick pause. We'll come back to the next section and continue working on our app. In the last section, we displayed a full comment list, and if you had a little bit of luck, and I say this if you're lucky this time, you might have seen an error message that looked like this on the screen. Something that says, failed assertion, data not equals null, null is not true. So really quickly, let me tell you a little bit about why we're seeing this message. As a quick reminder, we're making use of the Hacker News API, and you and I do not have control over the information that is sourced from that API, or the information that comes into our application. So at certain times, we might get some data from the API that we do not really expect. In particular, the thread that I'm seeing right here, or I'm viewing here on the screen, has some number of comments tied to it that have been deleted by a moderator. When a comment is deleted by a moderator, we still get a response from the API that indicates that comment existed at one point in time. However, that comment's by property, so its author, and its text property will have values of null. So what we're currently seeing for this error message over here, the thing that says data does not equal null, and you'll notice that it's an exception thrown from the text widget right here. It essentially means that we try to create a text widget and we passed in a value of null for the item title, or we passed in a value of null for the subtitle, or for the essentially the author on here. And again, this happens whenever we have a deleted comment coming in from the API. So to fix this, all we have to do is open up our item model file inside the models directory. We'll find our from.json method right here. And you'll recall that we had already put in a couple of different little helpers in here to kind of set defaults for the different properties anytime that we parse this JSON coming from the API. And so again, having these kind of question mark value things right here, the purpose of that was to say, if we get a null value for text right here, then instead use empty string. And so we're going to do that same exact method for the by property right here as well. We're going to say that if this is a deleted comment, and deleted comments do not have by properties on them, rather than assigning null to by, I want to assign empty string instead. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'll save this file. Now, quick reminder, if you make that change, and you now try to look at the same story on your application, you are still going to see this error message. And the reason that you're still seeing that error message, remember, we only call from JSON right here when we get our news item, or the actual item itself, from the API. So because you have already fetched this item from the API, it's already ran through from JSON, and the next time you fetch it, you're going to be getting it through the from DB method right here instead. So if you go back and try to look at the exact same story, you're still going to see that error message unless you clear your cache. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to try to look at the electrifying our network story again after doing a quick restart. But first, I'm going to clear my cache by doing that little pull down to refresh. Okay, so there's the refresh. So I've now dumped all my cache. Now I'm going to scroll down and find that electric story. So here's electrifying our network. I'll click on it, and I get my comments loaded up. Okay, so I got the crash, but I can tell you the crash is unrelated to the fix we just put in. That was just a random crash. So let's take a quick pause. We'll continue the next section, and I'll pull that thread back up really quick. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. At the end of the last section, I tried to test out our fix for handling null values coming from the API, but my emulator crashed. Kind of unfortunate, but I just restarted it, and I'm back at that same thread. So now on side of here, I'm going to scroll it down a little bit, and at some point in time, you're going to see that I have two empty tiles right here. So these two empty tiles are comments that were deleted, presumably by a moderator on the actual Hacker News website. Now, having these empty tiles definitely does not look very nice. One thing that you need to be aware of, however, we don't really want to just entirely hide this tile, because even when a comment gets deleted, the children or the replies to that comment are still actually visible. And so in general, we like to still show a tile for that deleted comment just to let our users know, hey, at one point in time, there in fact was a comment here. So if that has any children or any replies to it, the entire structure of the thread makes a little bit more sense. However, I think that it would be kind of nice if we showed a little message inside of here just to tell our user, there was a comment here, but now it's deleted. So in order to put in that little message, I'm going to flip back over to my comment widgets build method. And then where we put our list tile together right here, we're going to add a little bit of a check around subtitle. So we're going to say that if item.by is an empty string, then I want to show a little message inside the subtitle that says just simply like deleted. And so that'll be just a tiny piece of gray text that shows up right there. That's just going to tell our user, hey, there was a comment, but it got deleted at some point in time. So to do so, I'm going to set up another ternary expression. So we're going to look at the item.by property. And we're going to say if that is equal to an empty string, then this must be a deleted comment. So I'll then put down the structure of the ternary. So there's the Boolean expression. I got the question mark. If item.by is equal to empty string, then I'm going to show a text widget that says simply deleted. If item.by is not an empty string, then we will instead show the item's author. All right, so I'll do a save here and we'll test this out again. So I'll do my refresh. And we'll wait for the refresh to kick in. There we go. And now I'm going to find that same story I was looking at just a moment ago, electrifying our network right here. And now I'll scroll on down. And there we go. They're both marked as deleted now. And so that's our sign to our user that, hey, there was something here at some point in time. Now it is very purposefully gone. So this looks a lot better than we had before. So let's take a quick pause. I think one of the last things we have to do is make sure that our recursive comment threads get kind of indented on the left-hand side. So let's take care of that in the next section. In this section, we're going to start thinking about how we can handle the nesting of each child comment within a thread. So to get started, we need to first think about how we're going to kind of indicate how far in a particular comment should be indented. Once we figure that out, we'll then figure out how we can actually physically indent it from the styling perspective. So as far as actually deciding how indented a particular comment should be, we're going to introduce a new instance variable on our comment class. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add in a name property called depth to every one of our comments. Our top level comments are going to start out with a depth of 0 to indicate that these are top level comments. The top level comments will have 0 indentation to the left-hand side. Then every time that we create a new level of comments, we'll increment that depth property by 1 to indicate that this comment right here should have like 1 level of indentation. And then the one nested underneath that will get a depth property incremented to 2. So it has essentially 2 pieces of indentation in front of it. Now again, we're going to first kind of set up this entire depth system. And then we'll figure out how to use this depth property to actually add in the indentation that we're looking for. So to get started, I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. I'm going to find my comment class, and we're going to add on a new instance variable to this thing. That's going to be an integer, and we're going to call it depth, like so. And then we'll say that if you want to create a comment, you have to provide the depth property. So I'll add in this.depth to the constructor. Okay. Now there's 2 locations where we create a comment. We first make a comment for all the top level comments inside of news detail. And then we create more comments from directly inside the comment class itself inside this thing's build method right here. So we need to make sure that in both locations, we initialize that depth property appropriately. So I'm going to first flip over to news detail. Here's my news detail widget. I'm going to go down to my build list method right here. Here's where we create our comment. And so again, every comment that we create inside of news detail is always going to be a top level comment. So on to the comment constructor, I'm going to add in a depth of 0 to indicate, yep, top level comment. Okay, I'm going to save this. And then I'll go back over to my comment file. Here's the build method inside the comment file. I'll go down to where we create these nested recursive comments right here. And whenever we create one of these nested comments, I'm going to pass in this comment's depth, so the current comment's depth, plus 1. And so every time that we recurse down and create another level of comments, we're going to increment depth by 1 and pass that in for the child comment. So now we've got a kind of integer that keeps track of how deeply nested a comment is, and we can use that integer to add in our indentation to the left-hand side. So let's take a quick break. We'll continue in the next section, and we'll figure out how we'll add in that indentation. In the last section, we added in a depth property to our comments widget, which we're going to use to decide how far in a comment should be indented. To actually indent the widget itself, we're going to be making use of a named property on the list tile widget that we're using to represent the title and the author of each individual comment. Let's take a look at the documentation for the list tile, and we'll figure out how we can use that thing to add in some indentation on the left-hand side. So I'm going to flip back over to my documentation. Here's the list tile class, and as you might guess, we'll go down to our constructor. So here's the constructor. You'll notice that it has a property called content padding. The content padding property right here is what decides on how much space to put around all sides of the list tile. On the properties section on the right-hand side, I'll find content padding right here. I'm going to take a look at the documentation for that particular property. Now you'll notice down here at the bottom of the documentation for content padding, it says that if we do not provide a value for content padding to the constructor, so if we add null in the constructor, which is what we're doing right now, then a default of edge insets symmetric horizontal 16 is used, which means that by default, there's 16 pixels of indentation on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So we can pretty much do the same thing for our purpose as well. We're going to define a content padding property, and we will define a edge insets that is going to add on a fixed amount of spacing on the right-hand side, but then a variable amount on the left-hand side depending upon the comment's depth. So I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. I'm inside my comment.dart file again. Inside the build method, I'll find the list tile property right here, list tile constructor, and I'll add an additional property onto it. So I'm going to say that this thing has a content padding, which will be an edge insets, and I want to specify the very specific padding on the left-hand side and right-hand side. So I'm going to use the only constructor. We know that we don't want to mess around with the spacing on the right-hand side. We always want that to be 16 pixels. So on the right-hand side, I'll use the default of 16. And again, I'm using 16 because that is the default value. But then on the left-hand side, I'm going to use depth times 16.0. So whatever our depth is, be it 0, 1, 2, multiply that by 16, and that's how much padding we should have on the left-hand side of this list tile. So let's try this out. I'll save, I'll refresh, and we'll see what this looks like. I'll click on any given story, and then when this thing starts to load up, you can see that we get that nice indentation going. Now the indentation looks really good. The only issue is that the top level stories no longer have any indentation whatsoever. And so that's kind of the downside of starting off with a depth value of 0, as we did from inside of our news detail. So we definitely want to have a little bit of padding on the left-hand side. We could either always add on 1 to depth right here, or we could just go back over to our news detail, and where we create our comment, rather than initializing it with a depth of 0, we could instead provide a depth of 1. So either way you want to go, but I'm just going to very arbitrarily decide to go with adding on 1 to depth right here. So I'm going to save this. I'll do another refresh. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, so I'll click on the article again, and there we go. Now our top level comments again have a little bit of spacing off to the left-hand side, and everything underneath that is very nicely indented. Well, this definitely looks pretty good. One thing I want to mention about this, however, that's still a little bit lacking, you'll notice how on many of these comments, we've got these very strange symbols like I, ampersand, pound, x27, semicolon, excuse me. So it turns out that when the Hacker News API serves us this comment text right here, it serves it up as HTML. And so what you're seeing right here is an HTML representation of the comment. And any special characters within the comment get converted to a little symbol to avoid any possible script injection. And so in particular, the ampersand pound x27 semicolon right there represents a simple apostrophe. So it's that right there, I've, literally supposed to be I've, like so. So I think that we should probably do a little bit of cleanup on these comments before we attempt to show it on the screen. So let's take a quick break right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to do a little bit of pre-processing on the comment text just to remove some of these nasty looking symbols inside of it. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. In this section, we're going to do a little bit of cleanup on the actual comment text that gets displayed on the screen and try to remove some of these different little symbols that appear to be cropping up all over the place. So we're going to do this cleanup directly inside of our comment widget. We're going to say that before we take our comment text right here and add it into the list tile as the title property, we're going to first do a little bit of cleanup on item.text right here. So I'm going to begin by taking out that text widget, and we're going to instead call a helper method that we'll call build text. And I'm going to pass our item into that thing. And so inside of this build text helper method, we're going to return eventually a text widget, but it's going to be really cleaned up with a lot of those extra characters removed. So down towards the bottom of the file, I'm going to add on a build text helper method that gets called with an item model, and it's going to return a widget. I'm going to define a temporary variable inside of here called text. We're going to take the item.text property, and we're just going to replace a couple characters inside of that string. Now, to replace a character inside of a string, we're going to use a built-in method called replaceAll. The replaceAll method takes some string, we provide some character or some pattern inside of here to look for, and then as a second argument, we provide what we want to replace that with. So if we ran this code right here, we would find instances of / and replace them with kjd blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's definitely the pattern we're going to use. So let's look at the code or the text that we have right here and find some of the different repetitive patterns. Now the first one is the character for an apostrophe. So we want to look for the sequence ampersand pound x27 semicolon and replace it with a simple apostrophe instead. So I'm going to look for ampersand pound x27 semicolon, and then I'm going to replace that with an apostrophe. And to indicate an apostrophe, I'm going to first put a set of double quotes, like so. And then inside those double quotes, I'm going to put a single quote, like so. Now I put in some extra spaces in here just to make the syntax a little bit more approachable, but I'm now going to delete those extra spaces, and I'm left with that right there. And so it looks like it's just a couple of little ticks on the screen, but again, that's a set of double quotes with a single quote inside. Now the next thing I want to look for is these paragraph tags. The paragraph tags are meant to indicate new line characters, or they're essentially meant to split different paragraphs of text. There are both opening paragraph tags, so that's an opening one right there, and then you might see somewhere else, you'll sometimes see closing paragraph tags. I'm not immediately seeing any, but they definitely do exist. So a closing paragraph tag would be, well, here's like a italic tag right there. I think you get the idea though. Definitely not seeing any closing tags, but I know that I've seen them previously, so we're just going to handle both cases. So I'm going to do a replace all. We're going to look for an opening paragraph tag, and then anytime we see one, we're going to inject 2 new line characters to forcibly get a paragraph to appear inside the text tag that we're using. So I'm going to put in \n/n, and again, that's going to introduce kind of a new line into our comment. And I'm also going to do a replace all for any closing paragraph tags that we might see. And for those, I'm just going to put in an empty string to remove it entirely. Now there's definitely other characters that we could replace, but I think you get the idea here. If you want to go through and find some of the other repetitive characters, feel free to do so, but I think that you're kind of getting the idea of how we would approach this. So after we've kind of cleaned up our text here, we will return a text widget with text inside of it like so. Let's do a quick test and just make sure that that cleans up some of those extra characters. So I'll refresh my emulator. And then I'll find some arbitrarily large thread. That one's going to work. And now you'll see here's the same one we had before. No longer do I see the ampersand pound blah blah blah. I see a simple apostrophe instead. In addition, you'll notice that the comments are kind of nicely divided anytime that this original author added in some new line character in the original post as well. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So I definitely like this, but there's still a couple of things that I think we need to address. In particular, you'll notice how we are correctly showing the list of comments, but when we first load the comment list up, we show that still loading comment stuff on the screen. Definitely doesn't look that nice. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back to the next section and we'll put in some better loading widgets than what we currently have. Our application is definitely looking pretty good. The last thing I think we need to address is to make sure that when we first load up a list of comments, we don't show that simple still loading comments text on the screen. So in this section, we're going to figure out a slightly different way of approaching that. Now you might recall that previously when we put together the news list widget, we had that stand-in very temporary loading widget. If you scroll through fast enough, you'll see it very temporarily appear on the screen. It's that kind of two gray boxes that appear. And so we had originally implemented that inside of our loading container.dart file in the widgets directory. So here's the loading container right here. Remember, we had a list tile. Inside there, we had two of those gray boxes being displayed. And so I think that when we first click into a comment thread, it'd be really nice to show those on the screen rather than showing the still loading comment. So to do so, I'm going to flip back over to my comment.dart file. Inside of here, I'm going to import the loading container.dart file. And then inside this thing's future builder method, rather than saying snapshot.hasData right here and showing that simple text of still loading comment, I'm going to instead return a loading container, like so. So let's save this and give it a quick test. I'll do another refresh. We'll let the refresh kick in. And I'm going to find some arbitrarily large thread. How about this one right here? All right, so that definitely looks better than what we had before. Now it still doesn't quite match up. Like it's not super evident to our user that, hey, we're about to have a comment appear here, but I would say that it's definitely better than what we had before. One other possible approach that we could take would be to show some type of loading spinner here instead. The reason we didn't go with the loading spinner here is that, remember, this is a loading container inside the comment file. And so inside the comment file, we're going to have many comment widgets on the screen at any given time. And so I would definitely not want to show like 50 loading spinners to the user right away. Instead, I think that it's reasonable, more or less, to show those kind of gray bars that indicate, yeah, we're going to have comments or content here eventually. I think that the gray boxes only look kind of nasty when we have a very long comment as well. If we have a shorter comment, I think that the gray boxes actually suit it quite nicely. Let's try this one right here. Okay, I don't know. I think that looks pretty good myself. Okay, so I think that's it. I think that we finally fleshed out our feature set, and it only took us forever to put together, but we did it. So let's take a quick break right here, and we're going to do a quick review of everything we did in the next section. All right, my friends, we finally did it. We finally got our application to a very usable state. Now, before we close out this app, I want to do a quick review of some of the high points around it, starting first with our stories block. So the big, huge focus inside this entire application was having as efficient a data loading process as possible. Everything started here inside of the stories block. The stories block got access to a copy of our repository, and that repository mediated access to the two different information providers that we had inside of our application, the API provider and the database provider as well. Inside the repository.dart file, so here's the repository, we had a list of different sources and caches that the repository could use. These sources and caches were defined using abstract classes. So at the very bottom of the file, we put together an idea of what you have to do to implement a source, an idea of what you have to do to implement a cache as well. Now these two interfaces that were created by these abstract classes right here were implemented by the API provider and the database provider as well. The very important thing to keep in mind about these two abstract classes, or the use of interfaces in general, is that they only define the requirements for the names of methods, the arguments, and the return values as well. There's nothing to say that the add item method or the clear method right here have to actually do something in particular. And so we absolutely can create a class that implements the cache abstract class that has a incredibly broken implementation of add item or clear. It's really up to you to make sure that whatever class you create that's going to implement these abstract classes actually implements these methods in a correct fashion. The methods here are really just used for record keeping and not necessarily to validate what your code truly does. Now inside the repository, the most important method without a doubt was fetch item right here. Whenever someone called fetch item, we looped through all of our different sources in a particular order and waited for one to retrieve the item that we were looking for. Once we found that item, we then looked through all the different caches and backed the item up into those caches. And then finally, we return that item. And so that brings us back to our stories block. We expose the repository through the use of the top IDs and the items output and the items fetcher streams. Remember that we had the items output and the items fetcher stream controllers inside of here specifically to solve that multi-subscription issue that we ran into. If you recall, we had found that the items transformer right here was being called far more often than it should have been called. And that was all because every time that we had a stream builder that listened to our, at the time, items stream, every single stream builder created a new separate scan stream transformer. And so for every single stream builder that we had, we saw that we just were getting these repetitive, incredible number of calls to fetch the same items over and over again. And so we solved that by setting up two separate stream controllers inside of our stories block. We had the items fetcher and the items output. The fetcher was sort of a single subscription stream. Now behind the scenes it still was a broadcast stream, but we kind of pretended that it was single subscription. So the only thing that listened to items fetcher right here was items output. And because there was only one thing listening to it, the transformer was only applied to incoming values exactly one time. And that allowed us to sidestep that big issue around the use of all of our stream builders. From there, we eventually got some information into our news list. Oh, one thing that we forgot right here. We left in this very bad call inside of the news list build method. Well, you know what? We'll leave that in for right now. I'll let you fix it up on your own because that actually brings us back to a very important topic inside of our app.dart file. Inside of app.dart, we did our navigation setup. Inside of here, we put together the onGenerates_route callback with the routes method right here. So for every possible route that we could visit, we returned a material page route. And inside that material page routes builder method, we had said that we could do some very easy setup right here for the screen. And so like we had just said a second ago, we have inside of news list, the constructor method or the build method right here, we have fetch top IDs. A very good place to relocate this call right here would have been into the material page route for the news list. And so I'll let you do that refactor on your own if you want to. Certainly where we're doing that call right now is not the worst thing. We can get away with it inside of this very particular application, but on your own application, you generally don't want to do any data loading from that build method of an individual screen. So we had the navigation inside of here that set up some navigation to a very particular route. And so a good example of doing that data loading was for the news detail widget right here. We got access to our comments block. We pulled out some information from the path that we were trying to navigate to, or the name route we were trying to navigate to, and then we did some initial data loading. And from there, we finally went into our individual screens of news detail and news list and started up the actual rendering process. And we've definitely gone through all that stuff quite a number of times, so I won't tell you about it again. Okay, so that's our application. It was definitely a lot of time, but I think we learned a lot out of it. So let's close up shop right here, continue in the next section where you'll see a couple of appendix sections for learning a little bit more about Dart. So I'll catch you later. Let's do just one last section because I can't let this line of code inside of NewsList stick. Yeah, this is bad, this is temporary, I don't want to leave this code inside of here. So inside of NewsList, we're going to take this call to fetch top IDs that is currently placed inside of our build method, and we're going to relocate it to our material page builder instead. So inside of NewsList, I'm going to remove all that stuff out of the build method. I'm going to leave the block behind because we still want to get access to our block and pass it along to the build list method. I'll then close that file. And I'm going to go back over to my app widget. So inside my app widget, I'll find where we put together our material page route for the news list. So inside of here, we're going to go through a series of steps that look identical to what we did for the news detail down here. I'm going to first get access to my stories block by referencing stories provider of context. And then right after that, we'll start our data loading process by calling stories block dot, and then we're going to look for our fetch top IDs right here. All right, let's save that and do a quick refresh. So there's the refresh. I'll wait for that to kick in. And then we just want to make sure that our stories appear on the screen. And there we go, stories still appearing. All right, very good. So now I think we're done. Sorry, I just couldn't let that go. So quick break, continue in the next section. Again, if you want to, you can continue in those appendix sections.